Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Thursday night, February 2nd, in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, of course, today being Groundhog's Day, there's a lot of discussion about spring weather outlook. So I thought we'd just kind of dig into the data and kind of see what we can see here from some of the historical records and then talk about some of the new model forecasts. So first thing to look at here is a graphic from one of my favorite websites called Climate at a Glance. I will be sure to kind of link this one in the video notes so you can access it. What it's doing is using NOAA data, we're reconstructing for the whole of the United States, the contiguous United States, so the lower 48 here, what our February and March temperatures have been like since 1895. Now, since about 1970, I decided to detrend the data. And what you can see here is that there overall has been an increase across the United States, the whole, lower 48 here, of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And most of that's coming with a bit warmer overnight lows. But there's still quite a bit of variability year in and year out. And we have a question as to which one of the years coming up is the one that, will it fall above this trend line or below this trend line? So we're going to try to answer that here in just a moment. But just want to point out something here. As we move through February now and into March, there's already been quite a bit of warmth in the system. And I want to show you what that looks like here. One of my favorite things to start to monitor this time of year comes from the U.S. National Phenology Network. And this is just a way to look at what they call the Spring Leaf Index Anomaly. They blend together a lot of different techniques, including satellite, including data from the RTMA, which is a way by which we collect daily high and low temperatures, and also a lot of other user reports. And what it's showing you is compared to the historical average, where, if anywhere in the U.S., is spring early or late. So a couple things to point out. We do see that already from Texas. I know there was a big ice storm that just went through here, but from Texas all across the south into the southeast, most of their metrics would suggest that spring is showing up quite a bit early, where it's later in Southern California and in Arizona. So we'll just kind of keep up to date on this particular website. I think it's just a great way to kind of complement some of the things we've seen, but asking myself, why does it look like this? I just go back to what January did in terms of temperature anomalies. So this comes from Iowa State, and again, what we're looking at here is the December 31st, or really this is January 1st through February 2nd, average temperature ranks by climate district. And we know that we had a lot of mild air at times throughout the month of January in the United States. We saw a big Arctic outbreak that happened over the last 6 days that got all the way down here into parts of Texas, setting up the ice storm. And we're watching an Arctic outbreak come across the northern tier of the U.S. now into the Great Lakes tonight and tomorrow, and ending up in New England tomorrow and Saturday. So we will work to kind of, in the month of February, knock these stats back a bit, but it was mild. And you get mild like that across the south, and we will see what appears to be an early arrival of spring. Now, since we're starting a new month here, I do have some big questions about model performance. So you know that I tend to favor the European model and its longer range forecast. We call them the European weeklies. And I just want to show you some of the reasons why I favor them. So can I take you back here to a forecast released by the European model on January 2nd? So I included this one in a report that I did. And what it showed was that throughout the month of January into February 1st, that there was the forecast was for, if there was colder conditions, it was going to primarily be confined to the west, and mild conditions were forecast from the Canadian prairie through much of the rest of the United States. And despite the cold shots we saw at the end of the month, overall we look back and say that verified. So this is just something important to look at. We're going to trust the model. We want to know if it's been performing well. We know that going in the near term, the temperatures are going to remain mild. I showed you this in this morning's video, but I'm going to bring it up again. This is the 12Z European model run, 5-day sliding window of temperature anomalies through the middle of the month. In fact, the last bit here goes from February 12th to the 17th. We continue to see a very similar pattern setting up across the United States. And one of the big things we keep talking about with this pattern is kind of the prevalence of a southeast ridge, the lack of any really high latitude blocking over Greenland or over Alaska. And it does appear to be a little bit of split flow in the Pacific that might drive some colder air in the west, but it's got to bounce over the top of this ridge. And that could be the main factors driving this. Despite even a polar vortex disruption, we didn't get the large Arctic outbreak that was kind of forecast here for a lot of the United States. Potentially that could have happened with that. So the shots of cold air that have come through have been brief, and for the most part they've stayed north, with the exception of the one that set up the ice storm from Texas through the Mid-South. Now from here, I want to go out and take a look at the newest forecast. So this was just released this evening. This is now going to go from mid-February to mid-March. And you notice that during this time period, the model is now much more cooler across the Canadian prairie and quite cold across the west. And there is a little bit of a feedback setting up here in that when there's a lot of snowpack throughout the Intermountain West, the model tends to respond by showing up with a lot of cold anomalies. I've seen that many, many times. But I think the big factor going forward is going to be the presence of some sort of ridging event over the southeast that's going to keep showing up in the forecast. So let's keep kind of thinking about that. But again, if you just said, hey, the model did a good job with January, we got to get a little credit here going forward. This is mid-February to mid-March. All right. We certainly know that the next 15 days are mild overall if you're east of the Rocky Mountains. Okay, next, what I want to do is I'm going to show you snow water equivalents. Let's turn our discussion over to the water side of this. We looked at the temperature. Let's look at the precip. Right now, we do have quite a bit of snowpack that is in throughout the plains, getting into the Red River Valley of the North and the headwaters of the Mississippi and throughout the Great Lakes and north of there. We're still waiting to see this fill in here in parts of Montana, getting to southern Alberta and Saskatchewan. And the snowpack in the west, we looked at that many times. It's still good. The snowpack overall is quite good. The upper Colorado Basin in through here and throughout the Sierra Nevada, into Nevada, and even the Cascades, the Northern Rockies, the Blue Mountains here are still showing good snowpack. They need more, and more is coming, but they need more to continue, to really, I guess, to continue to eat away at the drought picture. We can see that a lot of this, although there was a little bit of snow mixed in, this was mostly where our major ice event went through. So we're going to talk about that again in a few seconds. But what I want to think about here is what's underneath this snow? What does the soil moisture look like? And we've hit this in the last 3 or 4 videos, but it just brings up an important point. The drought from fall of 2022 that hammered on the Mississippi Basin, it's still there, down about 100 centimeters or 40 inches. And we're just going to keep looking at this as we go through these late winter and spring months to see where things are going to change. This is something that needs to change in order to reduce the risk of drought redeveloping into spring and summer of 2023. All right, that's just a very important thing to watch. Now, down where I expect a lot more heavy rainfall, although there will be a break for this weekend, this is an area that the soils are saturated. There's a lot of flooding down here. The ice is melting on this side of it, and we're going to continue to see very, very wet conditions down here across the south and the southeastern part of the United States. And I've got some better news for California and the West Coast going forward. But we got to come back to this bigger question. So today was kind of a day we just think about long-range prediction. What about contiguous U.S. March, April, and May precipitation? So we kind of set this up saying we need more, especially throughout the corn and soybean belt. We know it's quite wet down south. So I looked again at the whole country back to 1895, detrended. And overall, that time period, March, April, and May for the country has got only a very slight increase in total spring precipitation. Now we know that the delivery has been changing, more big one-off events followed by longer stretches of drier weather. But the tune right now is to 0.02 inches per decade. So that trend line's relatively flat. Now, thinking about this, I went in and I grabbed all of the really wet years going back to about 1970, and I put them all together in one composite map. So when I tell you that we looked at the contiguous U.S. and how wet it was, here's the years all stitched together. A lot of that in the lower Mississippi Basin, a lot of that in the Mid-South, but also wet in California. You notice that very few climate districts during those years when all stitched together were wet. I did find it a bit odd that of the 10 years I chose, seemed like they were always on odd years. Notice that? That this means nothing. I just found it odd, except for 90 and 2016. Here's the other interesting thing about this. When I think about these years being from the Midwest, I know that 91, 83, 95, 11, those were years where we talked about massive drought that developed here in the summer. But in the same vein, same discussion, we have 2019, 2017, 15, 16, and especially 16, 19, those were years, and 15 as well, where things were very wet in summer, which means that we cannot attempt to correlate the pattern that happens in spring directly with what we expect in summer. Okay, I just want to be clear on that. But using those years, I said, well, what needs to happen in the month of February and then into March, April, and May to set up a very wet spring? And are those things going to happen? So here you go. This was the first component of the analysis. I wanted to know what the jet stream had to do. And there's a couple of very important things with this. It has to be going fast through the Central Pacific right here in the north. It's got to hit California. It's got to run to the north in the mid part of the country. That opens up the Gulf, which means it helps to have a big southeast ridge. Here's the other way to look at it. Deep trough, this is key, over the Aleutian Islands. So that flow has got to come around like this and race. It then dives and goes around California and then runs up over a ridge here. So if we get this set up, much of the U.S. from the west coast to the east is wet for March, April, and May. Now, thinking about that, I wanted to know, is there a signal in the ocean temperatures? And this is what the signal shows. Now, we have to be really careful here because the years we stitch together include La Niña years, El Nino years, and neither, and so neutral years. But there seems to be a dominant signal of what we call the positive phase of the PDO. That's where there's cold water here surrounded by warm water in the North Pacific and some sort of El Nino-like behavior in the Pacific. And you'll note that that's not something the groundhog usually talks about, so we need to talk about it. You're going to watch an animation that goes back from November through December now into January of the La Niña fading. Now, we currently have quite a bit of warm water between Hawaii and Alaska, And we would know that in order to go to a wet spring, we may need to, that pattern would need to flip. And I do not anticipate seeing this water cool off dramatically over the next few months. But we are seeing the fading of a La Niña. It was quite strong back in November. Watch this one more time with me. And you start to see that right now the greatest changes are happening here, coming off of South America, and that is the beginning of the end of this La Niña event. So, just to show that to you, this is what the latest ocean temperatures are doing at depth. So this is going down in the ocean. This would be over on like the Australia side. This is the South America side. And there's a lot of warm water kind of ready once the trade winds fully let go to kind of slosh back. And that could end this La Niña relatively quickly. We could spend several months in INSO-neutral conditions. But that's happening along the equator. I don't necessarily see the full shift away from the warmth here happening through February, March into April. So that works against spring being record wet. Okay, that works against spring being record wet. Also, as I showed you here, we need to have a lot of momentum in the jet stream between 30 north and 60 north, westward momentum. And currently, we're sitting well below average. In fact, there's not been a lot of high momentum lately in this part of the flow, the westward momentum of the atmosphere. So this would really have to come out of the basement here and shoot way back up, but do it specifically right in this area. So that's something we can be on the lookout for. But as it stands, kind of putting that all together, this is kind of the big feature that I think needs to start to shift around. We love to look at these Hofmüller diagrams. They tell me what the tropics are doing, right? And so here's today. This would be all the way to the 12th of February. And what we're looking at here are these winds right here over this part of the tropical Pacific and Indian Ocean. Now we know that these colors represent strong trade winds, and they're expected to strengthen right in through here with time. And while that occurs, do you see this kind of slant to the westerly winds coming out of the Indian Ocean? They're going to try to push from the Indian Ocean over to about this point, meaning that we're going to start off with the MJO somewhere in this vicinity and then move its way there with time. Now, what's the point of telling you that? Well, when we look at the MJO phase diagram, we're finally going to get out of phase 3 where we've been for a while, and that is a phase that reinforces the subtropical ridge over the southeast. Right now, it looks less likely to pop out in 4-5 and maybe emerge on the opposite side of the phase diagram at some point in phase 7. Now, we've been looking a lot at this lately, and phase 7 historically gives us a jet stream pattern that does something like this. Now, we're asking, in February, going to March, April, and May, what do we need? Well, this is the opposite. There's one component that's favorable for wet and one component that's favorable for dry. This is not the right setup for the whole country to be wet going into the rest of winter and eventually into spring. And what's missing is the fact that there's no deep trough here. In fact, there's a downstream large ridge if phase 7 dominates for most of February. So if that sets up there, we tend to get flow around it that's anchored on a trough over the Hudson Bay. that tends to send quite a bit of cold air into the Canadian prairie. And if that sounds familiar, that's because that's one of the current things we're seeing forecast right here. The other component to this is that there tends to be reinforcement of this ridge in this area, which means systems roll down and then quickly peel off toward through the Great Lakes back toward, eastern Canada. So that's a more mild forecast for the east overall. Doesn't mean there won't be shots of colder air, but more mild and a deep draw on Gulf moisture. So what I don't like about this pattern is that it is not one that returns abundant moisture in February to the west. There will still be moisture coming into the west, but systems are going to come to it like this, not straight off of Hawaii. It's also one that unfortunately does not return a lot of moisture to the western and high plains. And we're now starting to see that showing up in the models. So you see the flow is getting better for the Pacific Northwest, Northern California. It's no longer nearly as dry from mid-February to mid-March as previously forecast. This is good late season snowpack. But with that setup, remember the flow coming around like this and some sort of subtropical ridge here. All the action is mid-south to the Ohio Valley. It's Great Lakes. It's New England. We could be drier in Florida. We could be drier again in Texas into parts of the plains. And this is the overall picture I think that's being painted pretty clearly for us about what mid-February to mid-March is going to look like. So that kind of summarizes what I think we need to be thinking about here over the next 45 days or so. There will be some drought relief here, but overall there will still likely continue to be deficits in soil moisture across the western Corn Belt and northern plains. Better snowpack, drought continuing and rebuilding possibly in the south, and I think that's just going to be the mainstay until we fully break into a spring pattern, which we won't likely do until after mid to late March. All right. Now let's get back into some of the things we just recently saw. This is the last 72 hours of total accumulated precip. About the only event has been the overrunning right down here from Texas into the mid-south and southeast. Now this is showing liquid equivalent, but I just want to point out that there were some places in through here and in through here where this was all ice, where we saw more than an inch of liquid in that. And that's why you've probably seen a lot of pictures and news videos and things about some places down here where we still have about 500,000 people without power in Texas, where there's up to an inch of ice accumulation. This was a terrible event. We're going to continue to see the ramifications of it, and it destroyed a lot of infrastructure, and it destroyed a lot of vegetation, trees especially. Now, I wish we could see the ice like we can see the snow on satellite imagery, because right here the sun is setting, and you can see, just take a look at the snowpack that is in throughout the plains of the United States and the Midwest. There's still quite a bit of snow on the ground here. But this is the large area of overrunning that's moving toward the Mississippi Valley and southeast, delivering some rainfall. We'll take a look at it in a few moments. But with that Arctic air that's coming here, there is going to be a pretty interesting lake effect snow setup, because the flow is like this, which is going to set up potentially these long tendrils of lake effect snow that could extend all the way here into like Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Indiana, and stretch even, maybe over toward the Appalachian Mountains as we go forward. The good news is we no longer see ice storm warnings on the all hazards weather map, but we're now dealing with the flooding. And all of these polygons you see here represent where we have flood warnings on our rivers. To the north, this is all wind chill advisory, wind chill watch, wind chill warning, and we do have a blizzard warning out for northern tip of Maine here. Strong winds are coming in with this system, and they're going to be delivering cold air that originated literally over the North Pole 10 days ago. What I love about this, and this is from NOAA's high split model, great model here, is that the flow came down, take a look, got wrapped into the trough around the Great Lakes, and is now coming back out and heading toward New England here over the next couple of days. So that's the source region of this brutally cold air that's going to sweep through quickly across the northern tier of the United States. Now, before we come back and talk about that, I want to show you the latest data from the 18Z run from the NAM. So this is the rain pushing east that left Texas and all that ice. And as it spreads over parts of eastern North and South Carolina and then down into parts of the southeast, two other things are going to happen here. High pressure cell moves in, blast the cold air east throughout the day on Friday, and look at what the model is calling for in terms of lake effect snow. This could be very interesting to get caught under one of these bands. It'll be a snow squall type situation. And at the same time, there's a weaker front that's going to hit the west coast. Now this is through 10 a.m. Friday. Getting through the day on Friday, there's the dome of pressure, high pressure here. And then as we play forward, you can see that that frontal boundary that comes into the northwest is primarily focused up in British Columbia. There's a weak clipper that moves out of Manitoba into Ontario and the northern side of the Great Lakes here, coming through on Saturday, or really Friday night to Saturday. But other than that, these little weak clippers, the next thing we're going to have to watch is showing up right here on the west coast by the time we get into Sunday. So let's go take a look at it by going over to our multi-model analysis. And I'm happy to report that unlike this morning, the GFS and European are now in better agreement. So we've already seen through Saturday. So once we get out here to Sunday 6 a.m., both models have this deeper low coming into Oregon and Washington. It will spread snow down and through the Sierra Nevada, interior of Oregon, and the Cascade Mountains. Now, as that passes through, there's actually an elongated trough that sets up, such that we get kind of like this, this string of pearls or daisy chain effect of low pressure systems. So here I am on Monday morning, getting into Monday midday and Monday evening. A clipper rolls through here. That's the top low. There's an elongated pressure trough right in through here that extends all the way down into Texas. What we're going to watch is Monday night into Tuesday morning, that broad area of low pressure could have one low here, one that was over the Great Lakes, and another one that forms down in the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas. Both models are in better agreement. I think the European's got a better resolved look at it. I also think the European is better on the depth of the next trough coming into the Puget Sound. The GFS is farther to the north. So as we go forward from Tuesday morning to Tuesday midday and Tuesday night, the next system we're going to watch is going to come out of Texas and Oklahoma. Now, given that there is high pressure here and this broader upper level ridge, this system hooks south and then races pretty quickly toward the Great Lakes. And it'll do it in both models. So this is now getting into Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, and evening. Now, what's interesting about this is the European model's faster than the GFS. See where the GFS keeps this? The European's quicker. I think it's because it's able to get the first system, this one, out of the way quicker than the GFS does. See, the GFS leaves it, the European's out. And because of that, this area of high pressure isn't still sitting in the way over the Midwest. It's now, according to the European, off the coast. So what happens is there's no roadblock. The system jumps out quicker, the wave ejects faster, and that also means the next one that comes into the northwest shows up sooner. So here we are out next Wednesday night, getting into Thursday morning, and both models have the system, just that the European, by clearing out the high pressure quicker, moves it out. Now there is an attempt by the models to put snow down on the back side of this. How far to the south and east that snow makes it is still yet to be determined, because we've got to figure out how much cold air is there. But this gets us out a full week. If we just look at what the next 10 days holds, let's look on the liquid side of this. This is the chance of getting at least an inch of liquid. Some of it could be snow, but an inch of liquid over the next 10 days. Let's now flip this over to the snow graphics. So here's the chance of getting over the next 10 days, 3 inches of snow. And you now see that with that system coming out midweek next week, there could be a path on the back side of it that picks up some snow. In the meantime, the clippers run through here. We have the cold air and the snow moving off the eastern Great Lakes and the lake effect snow, and the systems coming into the west are going to deliver as well. So here's the probability of 6 inches. Here's the probability of a foot. And I love seeing that the Sierra Nevada and the Cascades have a pretty good chance, even the northern Rockies, of grabbing another foot of snow. But the operational run, the 12Z operational run from the Euro, looks something like this. Here's that system right there. See it in the central part of the plains? Now, if you let me decide, I'd love for this to happen. We need the moisture here, even if it's in the form of snow. I also like this. All the snow coming to the Cascades, some in the northern Rockies, Blue Mountains, and down here to the Sierra Nevada. On my color bar, you see we're talking 12 to 20 plus inches. So this pattern isn't fully dry, but it's at least shaping up to be decent for those areas. Now, week 2, we see the reflection of that system still showing up as it slowly moves toward New England. And the drier forecast we see for the west, remember, it's not as though we don't see systems rolling through the northwest. They're coming. It's just that it's not the direct flow that can deliver the really, really heavy precip. The same forecast is echoed by the GFS ensemble. This is the 12Z run, again, wetter in this area. And that's starting to look more and more like the forecast, the forecast here of what mid-February to mid-March is supposed to look like. Now from here, though, we got to talk about what those temperatures are going to do. And I want to show you, here's the Arctic air today on Thursday. By the time a lot of you watch this on Friday morning, it will fully have pushed through the Great Lakes states into New England, where we're not going to see high temperatures getting above 0 degrees Fahrenheit on Friday and possibly even on Saturday morning. But a major warm-up is coming, a lot of mild Pacific air with this, plus a draw on the Gulf of Mexico. And we see very mild air for the weekend setting up for most of the United States, save parts of California. A little cooler air in the Intermountain West on Monday, but very mild out ahead of this. That's Tuesday into Wednesday. And as I showed you earlier, the 15-day forecast with a sliding window of temperature anomalies is suggesting a lack of high latitude blocking that could send, the type that could send cold air into much of the United States. So as we play this out, we see a very mild go of it through the next, let's call it 10 to 15 days. So that kind of completes the story I want for North America. In South America, we need to watch this animation. So let's hope I can get this to play. There we go. Now what I want you to see here is I want to see how many of these storm complexes have moved in the last week through parts of Argentina, because that's an area that we've been concerned about being dry. A lot of isolated and scattered storms, and a lot of them have been south or they've been west overall. But some storms did move through here in the last week, and it's just important to point those out. North of it, throughout much of Brazil, very wet conditions, continuing to delay harvest efforts in like Mato Grosso and through central Brazil. But I want to take you back down to Argentina, and let's go to a great website again, World Ag Weather. I like this one a lot. And what it's showing you here is for Buenos Aires, those recent rains that came through did make a dent in the long-standing drought. In Cordoba, same thing. Santa Fe, same thing. They're making a dent in the longer-standing drought in these areas, really providing some much-needed rain. But again, it really hasn't rained too much in these areas since. Isolated thunderstorm complexes have been kind of the name of the game. And the problem is that the pattern's going back over to a pattern, to a setup where much along the Paraná River is going to be relatively dry, and same for much of the interior of Argentina. And I talked to a guy today from Argentina, and he was telling me that the Paraná River, because of how much rain has fallen on the headwaters, which is in this part of central Brazil, is still keeping that river level up as it goes through Rosario here. So it's just something to think about overall. The drier conditions to the north, good for harvest progress and planting of corn, but very wet conditions continue through central Brazil, which are going to continue to push that crop to bigger and bigger levels. I think the issues now go back to Argentina, where we could see high temperatures over the next 10 to 15 days, averaging anywhere between 5 and 8 degrees Celsius above normal. And just remember, it is midsummer down there. So we'll wrap it up here. Hope you all have a good rest of your week and weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.